for Tracy. Wow. Thank you all for being here. It's amazing. And congratulations to Tracy for such incredible turnout and an amazing show. Just a couple of notes from the studio. This happens to be the second anniversary to the day that I opened up this gallery. So, within that time frame, Tracy is the 12th featured artist. We've had over 30 events in here, ranging from art shows to book talks to corporate events to plays and poetry readings. So it's been a really active space and continues to be and will be into the future. So thanks to so many people who have been part of that for the whole journey, and so many new people who are joining us as we move forward. So, and thanks for Tracy for honoring us for being here and celebrating the anniversary with us. It's just such an exciting show. I mean, it's so thoughtful and considered, and I didn't know this before we had met, that this is your first solo show in Cincinnati. So congratulations to you.
Thank you.
You've been shown around the world, but the first time in Cincinnati.
Thank you.
I feel thrilled and both honored to have you here. And, you know, it's been a successful show so far, so I'm hoping that that continues for the rest of the month. The show's up technically. The closing is on April 29th. There's a book reading here on May 4th. We're going to keep it up through that night so that the people who come for the book reading is by a local author named John Young, that there's an extra chance to see the show as well. So that's it. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. We're just going to do this sort of as a casual conversation to go through here and talk about the show and Tracy's journey as an artist. I'm so impressed by some of the aspects of the show, including that there are 4 distinct bodies of work in here. Yet they all look like they're done in unison with one another. And that's in part and parcel your whole connections and your whole journey. I'd like to sort of back it up though and just go, okay, you know, I know a little bit about your growing up, and you were all over the place, and I'm curious to hear about that part of your journey and how that influences where you are. So I'd just like to hear you talk about that part of your life.
Sure. So can you guys hear me? Okay. First of all, thank you for being here. I'm blown away. Usually...
Bucky, can you turn off the amp?
Okay. Typically in these situations, like Paul said, I'm in a different city. I don't know anybody. I typically don't even know the gallerist. And so it's a lot easier to talk to people that I don't know. It's because, and I'll say why, I'm really nervous when people are looking at me. Any of you know I'm a talker, and I can talk to you one-on-one until you're just glazed over. But I'm really nervous when there are a lot of people. So Paul decided, let's just start this in sort of a conversational way until I can get my breath and relax. So thank you for being here. Thank you for this opportunity. It means the world to me to be surrounded by friends and families and colleagues. My family, save my kids, I think, are just not able to attend my shows typically because they're working or they're far away, and we have no family within 8 hours of here. And so this is just so cool to have my husband be able to see it. My brother's coming next week. He's flying in. My mom's flying in. So I am just excited. So thank you for being here. All right. So I am going to tell you, and this, my friend Dan's here with his daughter Iris, and he gave me, I think, some of the very best advice because he and I share this fear. He said, just own your nerves and own the fact that this work has really, really, really brought up some very raw emotion in me. I feel very vulnerable. I feel like you're reading my diary when you look at this. And so I will cry. And so I will. Let's just put it out there. I cry when I think about it. So I definitely am going to cry when I talk about it. Yes, as Paul said, my family and I moved around always. My dad was a test pilot for the Department of Defense, and so he tested aircraft across the arms of the military. And so I went to a lot of schools, elementary schools. I went to 2 middle schools and 4 high schools. And so what that was at the time was extremely hard to feel like you're tethered to anything. It's hard to feel like you had roots. It's hard to form friendships because it's just going to be painful when you leave. On the flip side, what that told me and what I wasn't able to realize until much later is that I cannot confidently say I'm one of the most adaptable people I know. I'm flexible, I'm spontaneous. I will find a way to talk to you, whether you want me to or not, because I'm always seeking connection and friendship. So I spent a lot of time in the Northeast. That's where I grew up initially, and then we began to sort of move all over the United States. So eventually that really wore on my mom, and so my parents divorced, and my mom remarried another pilot. We continued to move, and but by that point it was old hat, and I can pack a car like a Tetris car if you need any help. So anyway, I end up leaving. I go and I get a degree in social work, and I begin to study world religion and sociology, and I just could not figure out what I wanted to study. And so then I took some time off, and I went and worked for a homeless shelter and was in Boston and worked with homeless children and finding them proper educational supports and clothing and medication and more stable housing, and absolutely it was life-changing for me. And there's a piece up front, the very first piece on the left that you walk in, and there's a man holding a sign, and we befriended one another because he was always at the train stop in Boston. So my husband and I actually ran into him one time, and I was able to take pictures, and so he remains a big memory of that. So from there, I decided to go to grad school, and so I went to grad school and got a master's in social work, and that didn't feel right either. And so I did a fellowship in a children's hospital, which is where I met Jean-Paul, my husband, and began to understand that really what I was called to was the grief aspect that goes on in a hospital. And I worked in pediatrics, and so I worked with clients that had HIV and AIDS, many times babies whose mothers had died of AIDS, men that were dying of AIDS, had an indelible, burned into my soul that it began to teach me. We all laugh in the same language, we all cry in the same language, we all hurt in the same language, and we all mourn in the same language. And it does not matter where we're from, what religious affiliation we are 7 layers down. We are the same, we are humans. So from there, I decided to go into ER, pediatric ER and ICU work. And that is when it really began to click, this is what I meant to do. Because these children that were facing the end of life just taught me that there's so much more on that other side of the veil, that how could they possibly know? How could this 4-year-old possibly know? His family was waiting on him. They'd all been killed in a head-on collision. He was the only one who survived. And he knew when he came out of a coma. He said, oh yeah, my mom and my dad and my brother and sister told me they'll wait for me, but it's going to be a long time. And he's 4, how. story after story after story. And so I began to really, really, really dance that line and really want to know more about the veil and what was on the other side and how do different cultures. And so I spent a lot of time in the NICU, the neonatal intensive care, and so babies that were very, very, very sick, and it's a what they call a level 4, so the sickest of the sick. So they come in from other states, and most of them, many of them die, and just began to understand. It was the beginning of my understanding of connection. So we moved here. My family moved here about 12 years ago, and I had been staying home with my 3 children, 2 of whom are here. My 2 daughters are here, Maeve and Holland. They are 15 and 16. And then I have a son, Aiden, who's will be 23 and is a pilot, and he's finishing up his last year in university. So it was just a good time to reflect, like, what do I want to do? Do I want to go back to counseling? What do I want to do? And I remembered, I get to return to my first love, which is art. And so I had met a man that I worked for when I was 14 and 15. I used to be his stockist. He owned a little pharmacy, and I would stock his shelves. And he would notice that I didn't have friends, and I would talk to him about, when you're the new kid, there are no tables at lunch, right? So you go to the bathroom and you eat your lunch in the bathroom until somebody invites you to a table. And so he really couldn't stand that. And so he said, what are you interested in? And I said, I'm interested in photography. And so he and his wife would invite me over every Saturday, and they taught me the principles and the ins and outs of photography, which is how I ultimately got the SCAD scholarship. What I found, so when I came here, I went back to Art Academy, sort of finished some of my training, but was reintroduced to encaustic, which is where that all came from, and I loved it. I thought I'm never doing anything else, but I also get bored very easily, and so I began to introduce a lot of mixed media into it. So that's how I got here. So Paul had asked me when we were talking one day, what are the influences? Who are there artists that influence you? What are your inspirations? And I thought a long time about that, and I think there are 5 things that consistently in my life inspire me and that inform everything I do, not just in my work, but in my life. And first was become a mother, and I'm going to look back at somebody who knows when I met him, I'm not having children. And he said, well, I'm an Irish pediatrician. That might be tricky. It's from a very big family. I'm from a really small family. And I said, but I'm still not having children. And so I was on the birth control, and Aiden came along. And so I'm like that point whatever %, yeah. And so anyway, so we had Aiden for about 6-7 years, and really we're trucking along. We were the best parents in the world. I mean, we knew how to do this one thing. And we would tell you. Let me tell you how to parent. And then Maeve arrived, and Maeve said, let me tell you what parenting is. And then Holland arrived a year later, and then we laughed and said, we have no clue. And so we're outnumbered, we're scared, they smell fear. So definitely, they have been the most tremendous influences. They are our guides and our teachers, and it's such a farce that we're supposed to teach them. My God, I am such a smarter person because of them. Obviously, the grief work, I am meant very quickly because I don't want this to go on forever, but I'm meant to be with people who are in that realm, getting ready to cross over. Since I was 15 years old, I have come across fresh accidents. I'm always a first responder. My family doesn't like to drive with me because it happened twice in one day. You know, I mean, like they're like, we just don't want to drive with you, but I'm always a first responder, and many times the victims pass away. But I've found, and we'll talk about it later, but I've found why that is, and that I can be somebody that can say from my own truth, my own experience, do not be afraid. There's truly nothing to be afraid of on the other side. And so that has been, I think, my most important work, other than learning from my children. I can't say mothering my children. And then the traumatic loss of my father, we'll talk about that in a little while. You know, just living with a 12-year-old question of what's better, what's worse, to lose a loved one traumatically and suddenly, and they don't suffer, but you never ever again get to tell them all the things that you wanted to say, or to watch a loved one suffer and you lose them over and over and over so many times before they actually die. So that's something in my head that's always a struggle, just wondering as I watch others lose people that they love. So those are my influences. Artistically, there's a woman that blew my socks off, and it was here in 21C, you know, their gallery. I was just strolling around downtown, happened to pop into 21C, and I don't know, I'm going to say this was 10 years ago, but her name's Monica Cook, and she is a sculptor and assemblage artist from New York, and she had a sculpture that was a shattered automobile windshield, and she had two full-size figures entwined, and you couldn't tell were they violently involved in an active crash, or were they in an ocean, in a wave. It was so mind-blowing. I went back every single day until that exhibit ended. I couldn't get enough of it. I couldn't get enough pictures. I couldn't get enough. I just had to just keep going back. And I still visit her work. It hangs in my, the pictures of it hang in my, my studio. As a constant is that after my last child was born, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And I didn't know anything about MS then, and I had been very healthy, and it has been a ride. You know, to have been on the other side of the medical table for so long, and then to find yourself as the patient and vulnerable and dependent and lost, you know nothing about this disease or what the course will be, and changing treatments, and it just informs my life on a daily basis and the lives of my family, I'd say. As many of you know, someday, just a few months ago, I could barely walk. I'm on a cane for months. And then today, I was, kind of dancing in the kitchen. So I don't know what it looks like, but it absolutely informs. And a lot of the work is very physical. It takes a lot of stamina. I stand all day. So that's another thing that we can talk about. And just having an invisible disease, and in the times where I need to use, I'm very superstitious, and so I don't like to use my handicap card. Sometimes I have to, because I can't walk from the grocery to the car sometimes, and I get reamed for using that space. And what do? You try to educate and understand. They don't know. So anyway, so this series began with the collective memory. So I'm going to call out Michael Schmidt, right there, is a web designer and web developer at Pendleton. Well, independent of Pendleton, but many of us use him at Pendleton. And he and Terry Kern and I really became tight friends and started working on an almost 2-year project of completely revamping the Pendleton website together. I didn't know anything about web development, but I knew how to type, I knew how to take pictures, and so we really became a tight-knit group. What I didn't know, I've known Michael for a long time, and what I didn't know is he was a trained sculptor, and he said, have you ever thought about sculpture? And I said, I never, my art education was so spotty, I never got to sculpting. He says, so easy. It's so easy. That's what my mom says about cooking. The fire department that comes regularly to my house will tell you it's not so easy for me. So Michael began to teach me just very elementary sort of use of casting materials and plaster. And then Terry and Michael began to teach me how to actually sculpt an original, and I knew that I wanted to do a series. And I knew that I wanted the form to be kind of androgynous, because what I was trying to say was that that connection, that we are all the same in so many ways. We share so many commonalities, and that the beautiful thing is that the differences that we all bring to the table, right? So that's when that series began. Simultaneously, I had been working on, in my head, thinking about the love that this connection brings. And sometimes it's not always romantic love, it's not always uplifting love, it can be very destructive love. And I began to think through my life of the loves that were truly mind-blowing, heart-blowing loves. And we all have those. We all can name them as soon as we think about them. And so I began to I was studying connection, and again, with my world religion degree, I started looking through all the world religions and cultures, and it's all there. And every single faith, it says something about us, the interconnectedness of humanity, and not just humanity, but of every element in the world. But I liked what quantum physics said, and it posits that all things in the universe are connected and have an impact on one another. That the idea of entanglement, where particles can be connected through vast different distances, supports the idea of this invisible connection between all things, and that many of those connections atomically cannot be broken. And I thought that this is Vestiges of Atomic Love. What are the things we move forward after those loves, whether they're good or bad? What are the things that we carry forward? And so that's how this whole show was born. Because all of the work seemed to speak to that umbrella, right? Does anybody have any questions this far? I feel like I'm talking a lot. Yeah.
Tyrolean.
Oh, Tyrolean. So it used to be it's a region now of northern Italy, and it straddles the Austrian border. And so literally my family's tiny little village on one side, like my cousins live on the Italy side, and then like on this side is Austria. So they carry both passports, they speak both languages. But it's been, what's the word when they take a country, they annex. It's been annexed by both countries many, many times. So it's no longer its own. It's a region. So.
That's fascinating because it goes back to your childhood.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and then wrote a note, you were on this cultural code switching at a very early age.
Yeah.
And but then you go, well, that's part of your family's history.
Yes.
That they were culturally code shifting through this annex. And
always
like
straddling,
And to that idea that shifting and the nimbleness that's necessary to do that, the resiliency to be able to wake up the next morning and say, oh my God, we're moving, or I'm in a new school. I wanted to ask you a question. I love the written a piece about this particular sculpture.
Oh, hedging your bets, yeah.
And we talked about this one, and part of the description talks to you about you cherry picking or being accused of cherry picking religions. And I was struck by that term and that phrase within that, and you sort of first were offended by it,
I was
but then
deeply offended.
then really embraced it at some point, owned it.
Well, in defiance was like,
Yeah. I don't know, just, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about, that cultural shape-shifting, cherry-picking, how that influences, how you think about the work. Also, and this is sort of a subset of that question, is like, how do you, because you're a multimedia artist, how do you choose the medium to express any idea that you have? What shapes that, this is a sculpture, this is a painting?
okay. So I've talked about my family is very northern and very southern. As I always tell my kids, I'm a perfect mutt. I love animals. I've always had tons of animals. I wear this black all the time so that you can see how much I love animals. And so I was with some of my family that are more conservative, and I was deep into the study of religions across the world. And I'm not a religious person, actually. As much as I'm interested in it, I don't find that it helps me in my faith journey. I feel really constricted by a lot of it, and so I was constantly attending churches and mosque even, and temples and synagogues, and just trying to find what fit, and it just, some of it fit and some of it didn't. I was very frustrated. And so I was talking about this with a family member whom I love dearly, and she said, "You are such a cherry picker." I do think that there's value in every belief. I just can't find one that encompasses all the things that I believe. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And so I thought, I'm gonna be proud of that. And so in a discussion with somebody, I said, "What's wrong with hedging my bets?" And so, I'm gonna take every cherry and put it on my tree, and something's gonna work, And so I do, like I tell my children all the time, I really believe we're all climbing the same mountain, and it is all the same up here. We call our paths different paths. We call our tribes different tribes. But you know what? It is all this. We are all doing the same things. And so you do you. I'm going to do me. And this is my quilt, and I'm going to wear it proudly. And so this was made. I wish is Becky here by chance? Becky Hancock, do you guys know her from the Trove and from Pendleton, has these just incredible things from all around the world. But I said, "Becky, I need a bunch of ribbons and beads, and I want the most colorful, different, nothing the same." So she handpicked with me. God love that woman. She spent a lot of time with me on this. We found an African shaker. We found, or I found with my kids, a medical laboratory, like what's it called, JP? The iron thing that holds the beakers. Anyway, you can move the beakers up and down. What kind of research physician are you? So anyway, so then Michael had taught me how to do these forms, and so I began to paint this one, underpaint it, and I don't choose the mediums. They just appear. They just tell me that I need some this, I need some this. And so that's how it worked. Well, then I wasn't really happy. Like if you can see, like this is I love to go junking, and this is an old, like a photography flash. It's a reflector, you know. I think they also use them with like kerosene lamps. So anyway, I just had all kinds of junk, and JP had said, when are you going to get it out of the garage? And so I thought, you know what, I have a great use for all of it. And so that's how she was born. And so I started collecting, and many of them I had from, like my dad would always bring me things back from every single country, you know, and then now as my kids and family and I have insatiable wanderlust, so we travel a lot. And that's what I bring home. I oftentimes bring jewelry home or you know, some kind of talisman. And so this is all of the things. I didn't have to buy hardly any of them, but they're just symbols, that touchstones that people use in their belief.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Tracy, could you say a little something about the butterflies?
I'm gonna cry.
Okay, so you didn't hear that in the back. The question was, can you say something about the butterflies?
There are lots.
There are a lot of butterflies and dragonflies in my work, and many cultures believe that that is how our loved ones, their spirits visit us. And it is crazy the places I find butterflies or dragonflies. You know, dragonflies you think of as near water and always in the summer, and it is crazy. And for my dad, you know, that's very representative as a pilot. So they just, I don't consciously use them. They just come up. They just show up in the work, and so I want to talk really quickly about. There's a piece in the back. There are two large pieces. One has 3 figures and one has 1. And so very quickly, I'm going to try and make this as succinct as possible. And I've only talked about this publicly once. So I'm going to cry. So when I have MS, I have to go for contrasted MRIs all the time, you know, like so routinely that I know the tech's names, they know my kids' names. It's a thing. It's like not a big deal. They do a full scan of my brain and spine, looking for new lesions, uncontrasted, and then they do the same thing with the dye contrast. Never had a problem. It was my 29th MRI. Felt a little funky maybe, but nothing, you know, the nurse and I talked about it, nothing that was documentable. Went on to work. I'm really bad. I know my kids are staring holes in me. I'm really bad at not eating breakfast or lunch because I like to just work through and get home to them. I started feeling really funky. I thought I was hypoglycemic. So I thought, you know what? It's 3 o'clock. I'm going to knock off and go see my kids and eat some snacks. My son Aiden at the time, I think he was probably a senior in high school, had worked out at Lunkin while he was, you know, getting his private license. And he would have been working that day, but for some reason he was home. As I pulled into the driveway, I started feeling really lightheaded. I just knew something, it was more than hypoglycemia. And so I got out of the car and immediately began to lose the use of my legs, my arms, my hands. I tried to call JP. He said I was like a drunken leprechaun. He couldn't understand me. He's like, why would you be drunk at 3 in the afternoon? He couldn't understand me. I got to the door, and as soon as I opened the door, I collapsed. Aiden happened to be there. And you know, the rest is history. He called the paramedics. He got all my meds together. He was I could watch him, but I could not move. I could not talk. I could not speak. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. And then we think I had a seizure. It was very terrifying for him. For me, when I became unconscious, I could hear everything. I could hear everything. everything the paramedics were talking about. I couldn't move, I couldn't talk, I couldn't tell them that I could hear, but I could hear everything. So we get to the trauma center. They're doing like the doctor, I remember, above me saying, we're going to give you more epi, and that's just like being hit by a truck. And so anyway, yada, yada, yada. Days later, I'm home, and Aiden comes in and kind of skulks into the bed, and he said, can we talk for a minute? And I said, yeah, what's up? And he goes, what in the world were you talking about? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, you thought you were in a helicopter? And I said, no. And he said, yeah, you were telling me you were in a helicopter, that you saw Pap, my dad. What was that about? And it all of a sudden reminded me that I was in this space, and, I don't care, that I don't want it explained away. I call it what you will. I was in a space where I could talk to my dad. And I really wanted to stay in that space. And he said, you really are not allowed to be here. And so he kept pointing to a picture he had of my 3 kids, and he said, you have to go back. You have to go back because you still have work to do. So, not thinking of that at all, but it's in all of this work. This painting with 3 figures came up, and it has all of this symbol and imagery. And I was explaining it to someone, and my girls were in the room, and they're like, really? Is that what that's about? And I said, yeah. And they're like, And they always know before I do what the work's about. And they're like, so those are the 3 of us. The dividing line is the dividing line that kept you from going with Dad. It's pretty clear what it's about, So I like to keep them around so they can tell me what the work's about.
Tell us about the single image.
The single image, that all started with George Floyd. The uprising I felt, like it made me think like this one could stick. We've had so many opportunities to right our injustices, I'm gonna cry. Our kids go to a school that is so diverse, and it's so beautiful to walk into our home because it looks like United Nations. And I know exactly what kids we have to have the talk with. You put your hands on, and I'm sick to death of it as a mother. And I'm sick to death of it for my friends of color who, this is nothing new to them. What are you up in arms for? And so I began thinking about all of like Martin Luther King had a speech where he talked about, it was Isaac Newton first, where he talked about standing on the shoulders of giants, but he was talking about it in a scientific way. Martin Luther King used it in a social justice way, that we are standing on the shoulders of giants who slaved in fields, who were beaten, who were hung, who were persecuted, and we are building that momentum on their shoulders. And that's where that came from, that I truly have an infinite hope, which is from his poem, that we will get there, but it's going to take every single color, every single one of us to kind of stand shoulder to shoulder and say, stand on my shoulders. And I see it. I see it in my kids. I see it in their generation. I have hope. Thank you.
I'm going to switch it up to something a little less
Thank you.
emotional here for a second. First of all, I believe all this is done within the past 2 to 3 years.
Yep.
I don't know, there's a lot of artists in the crowd, but for you, non-artists, that's like a mind blower. This is a ton of work. There are 55 pieces in this show. 55 pieces here. And they're all done in the last all these are done in the last 2 years. It's just a ton of work to do. And there's just these layers of things, and I'll get to you in a second, there's a piece of here called Economy of Words that I love because it's a very simple form, right? But there's layers and layers of wax and impressions and patina put over the top of it, and each one of those layers is considered and thought about, and in its simplicity is its complexity, and that complexity always requires a lot of restraint and time, right? It's not easy to do something simple. It takes a lot more time,
Right.
To reach that kind of simplicity. So I am impressed by that and just wanted to acknowledge that. I'm curious about just a really mundane question is like
Good.
your
I
work
like mundane.
schedule. How do you, are you in the studio every morning? Are you there all day long? How many days a week are you doing this? Are you able to dedicate your life to the work you're doing?
I have to be careful because my kids are staring at me. I do work. Every weekday I work full time. Sometimes I work a lot more than full time. Maeve is staring a hole through me. And what I also know is that they are in high school and they are barreling towards the door, right? And so I made a commitment to them. I have 2 commissions I have to finish by May, and I'm taking the entire summer off. Like, I will not work for the summer. And I just want to be with them. I want to be with my family, and I need a break. This is such an emotional dump that I need to regroup. And so, so if any of you know Jeff and John Winkle, the twins, so they're going to be using my studio for Final Fridays. So please visit them. Their work is exquisite. I work. I need a very structured day, and it needs to include working diligently because I want to be home. My husband works in DC, and so many times he's not home, and I don't want my kids at home. When they told me recently that as teenagers they need me now more than they ever have, and so I thought I got it. So.
Mary, you had a question.
Yeah, and this question was coming before I understood that this was 2 years worth of work.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to ask you, how many projects are going on? Are they all happening simultaneously? And you're called to this one today, or tomorrow I'm going to, is that how you do it?
Michael can answer that because he has been such a right-hand man in that I was like, oh my God, I have one that's crumbling, or the head fell off, when I tried to put the compass in the body of one, I blew through her whole body, and he was like, calm down, it's gonna be fine. So he and I would make, we made them together, and we would make, a handful at a time. Is that about right? And then I would work on them. And then to a point where I thought they were, okay, you need to rest for a while. And then I would work on the next batch, and that's kind of how I got through that. Karen Heil she owns the very first one that I made, and so was able to just watch it come alive. And for her to own one of my sculptures, if any of you know, Karen is a renowned stonemason and sculptor, so that was such a coup for me. And she happens to be a close friend as well, but yeah. So I definitely had help. My friend Leslie Daly here is also a metalsmith and a sculptor, and I would go to her all the time going, ah, and what do I do? How do I make the metal do this? And how do I, yeah, you don't do it alone. We don't do this alone. And that's why I try to, I always try to call attention to people that brought me here, that locked arms with me and helped me get here.
Along that vein, I talk a lot with friends of mine who are artists about, we all go through these giant pockets of just complete self-doubt and insecurity, and our work doesn't matter, our work sucks, we suck, whatever the place you go into that dark space. And it's part of the ride of doing anything creatively and trying to do well is that self-doubt is part of the process. I'm sort of curious is when you get first of all, maybe I'm making an assumption. Do you ever get there?
Oh,
Or am I on
are
my
you
own?
joking? Yeah.
And when you go there, do you have a strategy to
Yeah.
how you get out of that space? What is your strategy?
So first of all, I know better because I've made so many mistakes overworking something to just walk away. So I have a little area where the 2D stuff gets turned to the wall and I just walk away. And the 3D stuff gets stuffed in the corner, and I and many of us have the absolute luxury of working with 200 other artists. And that's when they see me coming, I see Kay, and I'm like, and they go, oh, here we go, here she comes. She's gonna be here a while. But because I find such inspirations in my colleague, and I find such wisdom, and they're so free with what do you do to get out of a funk? What do you do to, I was actually I was at a show of some friends of mine last night, and I was talking to a friend who is in a real funk right now, and she's one of the people I draw the most inspiration from. And so it was shocking to me, you too, and I can't believe that. And so we talked a long time about that I think that anybody, no matter what you do, we all have writer's block or block, creative block. And I think it's time to pay attention. Are you depressed? Is there something more going on in your life? Are you feeling imposter syndrome? As a therapist, what brought you there? Why are you feeling like that? And so that's just time. I know I need to check in, and I need a hike with my kids, and I need to just go away for a minute. And so, and that the one where my friend Russ is standing in his, he can be my Vanna White. That is the one of the guy in Boston, the homeless guy. Got faced and worked on for years and years and years, because he meant a lot to me. What he represented meant a lot to me. I just wanted to do right by him, and so I kept walking away, and I'd talk to him and be mad, and finally he was done. So.
The last question I have, and then we'll open it up to everybody else, is you're going to take a little bit of a break this summer, get reacquainted with your family, recharge. Do you know what's next?
I do.
You do?
I always point right here. This is where all of that lives. The niggling, the ideas that won't leave me alone, the titles, when they're telling me who they are. And my middle daughter, Maeve, who hates people looking at her as much as I do. Raise your hand, Maeve. Maeve is a budding scientist, and we, for Christmas, had gotten her this, lab-level microscope, and have had so much fun looking at slides of things. And JP is a research physician and does a lot of stained slides, which are absolutely beautiful, of human tissue, lung tissue. And so we are going to take microscopic slides and collaborate. My youngest, Holland, is also she's going, is also an artist, and my son Aiden does a lot of aviation photography, and so we are going to collaborate together on a series. Yeah, and I'm really excited about it. Yeah.
Then open it up to the floor. Questions, Michael?
With your getting over the tough days, I would be working in the gallery next to Tracy on some work between meetings and things like that. She let me, welcome me into doing that. And when I see her, with the blowtorch out or juggling things or, all, not literally, but, working, I go over and snap a picture. And in doing that, I would always sometimes see a little note that would be sticking out. And her daughter, Holland, would always be hiding these little notes that would always change you from maybe being not necessarily
Everywhere. They're everywhere.
and it would just
Hundreds of them. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, so Holland, I don't know when it began, but without my knowledge, but they spend a ton of time at Pendleton with me. I have a Post-it note stack that, and so she would just take a Post-it note, write some encouraging thing. She would wrap it around the pencil and put it back in the pencil thing, so that when I pulled a pencil out, there's a note. They're everywhere. Like you couldn't believe the creativity, and so yeah, to have that to look forward to, and never knowing when you'd find a new one. Yeah. Holland.
So historically, growing up, Nick and I kind of got to grow up with your art. Kind of, you adapted and you found new environments, like coming out of our basement, and now being at Pendleton. And I never realized that you always historically did like painting and combined photography with that, but then suddenly you shifted to the bust and then the samples. And my question is, now that you have made those in the past year, do you find it more nostalgic, like you were revisiting like your tradition, or do you think it's like a new era?
That's a great question. So we had, where we used to live in Clifton, we had a barn, a really cool barn that I would always go and it used to be a carriage house, and you'd find horseshoes and animal skulls and stuff, and so that was always such a place of inspiration for me. But I had a studio in the bottom of our house, had this great light-filled kind of corner of the house, and I took the kids' ping pong table and used it as a work table, and I've never lived that down. But they would come in, they were tiny, and so they would come in and play under the table, sit on the table, draw with me, paint with me. So yes, anytime I return to painting, of course that comes flooding back. I had been not painting. All of the paintings were made since December, except for the homeless guy. All of those were created from December to now, because I had only been doing sculpture the past couple of years. Are there any questions that anybody has? All right. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Get a photograph of the crowd.
Oh, yeah. Let me do that.